Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. For the first time in its 43-year history, Korea's benchmark KOSPI index broke through the 5,000 mark during intra-trading last week, marking a symbolic milestone for the country's capital markets. The KOSDAQ followed suit this morning, crossing 1,000 for the first time in over 4 years and triggering a buy-side circuit breaker amid a sharp rally. With heavyweight tech stocks like semiconductors and AI leading the surge, questions are emerging about the sustainability and stability of this momentum, especially as global variables, including a potential U.S. tariff move on chips, come into play. Meanwhile, the Korean government is pushing forward with market reform bills and currency stabilization efforts. But is the stock rally running ahead of the real economy? And what signals should investors be watching for right now? For answers to this, we are joined by Shin Se-don, Professor of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. A big welcome, Professor.
Good evening.
And also joining us is Kim Mok-yeon, Professor at Seogang Business School. Good to see you, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start our discussion with Professor Shin. Now that the KOSPI has broken 5,000 for the first time, what does this actually signal to you about where Korea's economy and markets stand today?
Well, I think in a word, we could say it's monumental. Monumental in the sense that the KOSPI index reached to 5,000 from decade-old 2000 in such a short period of time, despite backlog of regulatory obstacles, as well as awkward real economy. Now, people began to believe that stock could be a source of wealth creation in addition to real estate. So it is a monumental that, 5,000 has been achieved in such a short period of time. The key question now is whether 5,000 level could be maintained and eventually surge above 5,000 throughout 2026 under global financial and geopolitical risks, in addition to Trump trade risks. And also, government has been promised to, change or make reform regarding financial market reformation. And so it is monumental that we have achieved the 5,000, but it is also monumental that we could surge above 5,000 throughout 2026 in the midst of, a number of challenges.
Right, so it is indeed a very symbolic development, but we'll really have to talk about how, what the prospects of the KOSPI would be moving forward. But before that, let's also touch upon the KOSDAQ. It broke past 1,000 points for the first time in over 4 years. Professor Shin, what do you think is driving the surge across the board?
Well, it could be the fact that, KOSDAQ has been relatively undervalued vis-a-vis KOSPI. So that, I think, relative undervaluation could be one reason. And also, there is a possibility of enough liquidity searching for profitability. And initially, the liquidity has been poured upon KOSPI market, but relatively, KOSDAQ has been in slump. But now, after reaching 5,000, the funds or liquidity is moving from KOSPI to possibly the KOSDAQ. So I think KOSDAQ, even if, the surge today was incredible, I think we have to see whether, KOSDAQ will follow up, with the movement of KOSPI for the last half of 2025.
Right. We'll have to keep close tabs on that. But putting all of these into perspective, the latest developments, of course, we've been seeing it's been like 3 months since the KOSPI broke through the 4,000 level. And analysts say this rapid climb has been driven by heavyweight tech stocks. Professor Kim, does that kind of concentration concern you in terms of market stability?
if you look at the how long it's going to take from 4,000 KOSPI to 5,000, it only takes 3 months. Like it's kind of historic that how quickly the KOSPI market is kind of increasing in a very short period of time. But if you look at the drivers, basically, there are two main semiconductors, basically the Samsung Electrics and SK Hynix. Their market capitalization is basically grow over from 35 to 40% of the total KOSPI. Well, that the profits is basically driven by the HBM, high bandwidth memory, when basically the index total gain was like it started from the 2,400 level. So well, we can say the two drivers, basically the driving drivers for the two semiconductor chips. So if you're gonna concentrate on these two, one on this semiconductor industry or two main large companies, what we think about this kind of situation? Well, we're gonna see some volatility. Well, if they're going down, basically the cost, like if you think about something happens in the semiconductors company or industry, well, what happens in the cost? Basically, well, it's gonna show the high volatility in our KOSPI market. And in addition, if there is kind of if you think about the GDP growth for something like the Korea's large economy, basically, well, our high growth emerging economy basically will depend on the one industry. So even though another industry is growing, well, it's not going to make a huge impact on the KOSPI market. I think that's kind of one of the issues that we're going to have. Therefore, in order to have a value for the KOSPI, well, we're trying to look for another industry, and we're going to think about building the base for our markets, such as like defense or bio and any other industry that can push up our KOSPI market as a driving force.
Mm-hmm. But on top of that, there's also the concern about America's moves towards a new tariff on chips. Professor Shin, do you think Korea's chip-driven momentum could hold up under that kind of pressure from the U.S.?
I think, I want to point out a couple of things. Can we believe Trump's, saying about the semiconductor tariff? Because everybody now is talking about takumakuri, meaning that, we can't believe, what he's saying anymore because he changes his mind so often. So whether, 100% tariff on semiconductor, could that be true? Could that be trusted by the people? That is one question. And second question is, even if it is true, it could backfire, America in the sense that domestic prices of the products using, imported semiconductors are surging, and that's going to have a very negative effect upon, the midterm election in November. So on the one hand, we can't believe, Trump's, 100% semiconductor tariff. I think that's just a threat. And even if that is true, I think it's going to backfire upon American consumers that Trump cannot stay on that, threat of 100% semiconductor tariff. So it wouldn't affect, Korean stock market, not even in a short term. So I want to downplay, what he's saying about the semiconductor tariff.
Mm-hmm. So we should continue to go our way. But right now, the KOSPI, it's hovering around the 5,000 mark, fluctuating up and down. But with this situation, Professor Kim, what do you think are the key challenges that need to be addressed in order for this milestone to become a stable new baseline?
Well, now we're talking about the semiconductors, and now we're talking about the AI bubbles. But if you think about the AI super cycle, well, for example, like Hyundai Motors, where basically in the CS 2026, Hyundai Motors introduced physical AI robots where they're trying to utilize those robots in their production line. And of course, in the market, the consumer market, Hyundai Motors is basically the high-ranking in the stock market. So what we're trying to do, well, AI super cycle is okay, and semiconductor is okay, but how you're going to verify those kind of growth in our economic future value. So we can see, okay, those kind of numbers that we're going to see in the company's output or company's profit, and we can verify those kind of issues as a real performance so that we can make some of those kind of investment. In the second term, of course, when we talk about a lot of policy, we talk about the regulation, and now those kind of government regulation, we're trying to have some issues on the corporate value program. And now, well, is it going to really happen? Basically, how are we going to reform in the structural way so that we can have some a lot of the investment, I mean, the investment friendly situation in our KOSPI market, so that, well, a lot of investment, we want to have a lot of inflows of the cash, or we don't talk about all those kind of investment, all from the basically the foreign investors, and we can really stabilize, or we can have some sustainability in our KOSPI market. And in addition, another issue that is the currency war. If you look at the $1 exchange rate, it's around like 100, 461. Why we're gonna have a weak one? Well, it's gonna help our organization or our company's purpose, or it's gonna help attract more foreign investors in our Korean asset. But if you look at the, of course, the exchange rate for $1 versus dollars, well, how are you going to solve those kind of issues so that we can fundamentally, as well as the investor-friendly investment. And if you think about the big two, well, we mentioned about those kind of semiconductors. Well, how are you going to, when I mentioned before, how are you going to look for another driving force for our economy? Basically, well, they talk about the bio, defense, batteries, well, how they're going to perform, and what kind of average P ratio, of course, in the index. Well, how are you going to think about the KOSDAQ? Well, of course, the KOSDAQ is the market growth on the KOSDAQ is kind of a good sign, but we are going to concentrate on only semiconductors. We're going to grow those kind of the investors. So I think it's one of the good signs that we can eliminate those kind of hurdles, where we can eliminate those kind of dependency on the semiconductors, and we trying to see how our market is going well with eliminating those kind of risks as well as hurdles for our investors.
Right. So even with the excitement, there's still a few hurdles before we call this the new normal, and we will be continuously working to eliminate those hurdles. But there are also movement on key reforms, mandatory treasury share requirement, and tax support. Professor Shin, how much do those kinds of changes really matter in shaping the market's future?
Well, first of all, the retirement of own stock or retirement of the treasury stocks, which is the same thing, reduce the number of outstanding stocks, and with the amount, demanding the stocks, when the supply of outstanding stocks decline because of the cancellation, I think it is going to contribute to the prices. Stock prices, that is true. But the problem is, if there is a regulation on that, retirement of the own stock, the behavior of the management will change, and they would not, reduce or retire the own stock. That's one thing. And second thing is, because of that regulation, it's going to kind of impinge upon, the financial the determination of the management. So I think it has both sides. It would have a positive effect upon the price, but it also impinge upon the management. So I think you have to consider and you have to balance the pros and cons of that kind of regulation.
Definitely. Regulatory changes like that could be a real turning point if they're followed through properly. But so as we've been talking about the developments in the KOSPI, one big question still lies ahead. So how far the domestic market will go this year? So some in the financial sector are now raising the KOSPI target to as high as 6,000 points. Professor Kim, what's your outlook on that? And what potential risks should investors keep in mind?
6,000 is kind of the dream numbers that we can reach this year as well. But a lot of people say, okay, when you talk about the 5,500 KOSPI marks, well, I think we can reach into the this year, especially for the end of the year. But now we're going over 5,000. Well, this basically is feasible that we can reach those kind of issues. But if you think about the true semiconductors, like the Samsung Electronics and the SK Hynix, well, if you can have some scenario that we can reach to 6,000, well, they are going to have those kind of 300 trillion won as a profit target. Right now, in 2025, where they have like a 200 trillion won as a profit target, but in order to reach 6,000 as a KOSPI market, KOSPI in 2026, basically where they have to reach the 300 trillion won profit target. It's kind of, it's possible, but since basically their demand is kind of full, especially for the SK Hynix in 2026 cases, well, is it reasonable or can they have those kind of numbers? Well, we see it's kind of outlook, so we are not sure, but well, it's possible. But as you can see, well, there are many risks that we're going to talk about, those kind of big tech company, and I already mentioned about the exchange rate, and of course, we talk about the interest rate for the Bank of Korea, or basically the Fed rate for the US, of course. We also will talk about the inflation rate and what kind of the fundamental issues that we're going to have, especially for the Korean economy as well as the world economy that we're going to have. So when we're going to have some output for the 6,000 as a KOSPI market, especially for the 2026, well, we're going to say, okay, 6,000 is not, it's kind of we can reach it, but in the realistically, basically, we are looking at the 5,400 or 5,600, all those kind of range. Well, it's my bold prediction, but when you think about those kind of issues, well, in the first quarter and second quarter period, where we can have those kind of good outlooks. So we can go over like a 5,500, but it's kind of go downturn at the second half of 2006. As well, we're going to pull down those kind of semiconductor coins. So, well, it's reachable, but we're going to see those kind of hopeful outlook for our KOSPI as well as our economy.
Right, quite an optimistic forecast we could be seeing. So, stock prices are hitting record highs, but Korea's real economy isn't quite keeping pace. Last year's GDP growth hovered just around 1%. Professor Shin, what is actually keeping those two from connecting, and do you think that could actually change?
Well, that I think usually in economic theory, that is a classical dichotomy. Dichotomy means a separation. Separation of financial economy from real economy. Separation of trade surplus and won depreciation. That's a classical dichotomy. And that means, the money made in the financial markets are not funneling into real economy. In other words, the financial market is separated from real economy. So no matter what level, KOSPI reaches, it doesn't help, real economy in consumption, real economy in investment. So you might ask why. I think one of the critical, answer to that is the money made in the stock market is not perceived as a permanent income. They just believe it is a transitory income that you're going to lose sooner or later in the stock market. So money made in the stock market, no matter how big it might be, it doesn't funnel into the real economy. I think that is the real problem. And that is a real dichotomy that Korean economy is kind of suffering. So government has to think about, the policies to, channel money made in the financial market into the real market in consumption and investment. I think that is most crucial, policy objective of this administration.
Right, a very important point to conclude our discussion tonight. The disconnection, it really matters. So if the gains stay on paper, the public really won't be able to feel the impact, and we'll have to try to close in the gaps moving forward. But we'll have to leave our discussion right here tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Shin.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Kim, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.